I think people have stopped coming in, so let's go ahead and get started. My name's Philippe Fortis, and I'm a program manager on the Windows Presentation Foundation team. And this is the first time we do Mix, and it's kind of the first day, so I don't really know what kind of an audience to expect. So help me out a little here. Who all was at the previous talk by Michael Wallant on WPF, like the Business Decision Maker talk? Anybody? I see very few hands going up. Okay. Has anybody here used WPF before, like written any XAML? A few of you as well. Okay. And I've made a big assumption that people are roughly familiar with markup languages and that interweb thing or whatever. Okay. Excellent. So let's start off first. What is, oh wow, font didn't work out there. But what is WPF? It is, aside from a strange acronym, it's basically a new platform for building out Windows applications. And those applications can either be very rich media applications that are installed on your local machine, or you can imagine, as you saw again this morning, the Yahoo example, applications that are still very rich but run within your browser and aren't actually installed. And one of the big tenets of the Windows Presentation Foundation is this notion of XAML. So again, this is declarative markup that produces code and allows you to easily and visually program things. But also it integrates with the code. So in this case, what I've got is I've set a click handler on the button. And that click handler is set to do click, which means it has a reference to the actual function called do click. So that maps directly. So when the click event is fired, the do click method gets called. And if you'll notice in the do click method itself, we've also got a reference back to sassy button, which is a name defined within the XAML. And we'll see an example of this later on. One of the big advantages of using this markup, this declarative model, is that it allows essentially XAML to become a lingua franca of sorts. And essentially you'll see today two tools right now, Expression and Visual Studio, that can both essentially interop and talk by using XAML. And there's already some third-party converters out there that are able to read these formats and export them, such as XAML3D or MobiFilm Aurora. And you see already we've got a few exporters from vector graphic programs such as Illustrator, as well as our own Expression Graphic Designer, which can export artwork in vector format out into XAML. And that can then be directly used by a developer within their application. And it will be included with Windows Vista when it comes out this year. But additionally, it can be downloaded for Windows XP and Server 2003. And if you are developing an application that is installed, it is an option, of course, to redistribute. There will be licensing terms to do so. We expect this will go out to machines fairly quickly. Aside from the new machines being bought for Vista, you'll just see a lot of people downloading this, especially, there'll be a few killer apps, I'm sure, that'll come out, and people start downloading and installing in order to be able to use those applications. And finally, we'll have WPFE, which there's a talk, which I'll reference later, that goes into more detail here. But that'll offer a subset of the WPF functionality across a broader range of platforms. So I just gave a lightning quick overview. I'm not going to spend too much time otherwise in giving an overview. Rather, I've decided that I think it might be better, and feel free to correct me, I guess, if I'm wrong, but I'll just show the code. I'll show some features, show some code, and give you guys a taste of what it's like to actually make and build something up. So let's start first by looking at a little demo. This is a simple little installed WPF application that I've made that just showcases some of the areas and some of the functionality that we have in the platform. So let's first start with controls. What you see here is a sample page, and I'm just showing you some of the controls that are available in the platform. So you'll notice that we have a lot of the standard controls, such as button. You've got text boxes, which in this case include rich formatting, checkboxes, radio buttons, sliders. And these are the standard. They conform to the Windows look and feel. And you'll notice they can actually use rich content. So in this case, I can have an image in there. Or he can be in here, or maybe he's here, or maybe he's hiding in the combo box, and even in the menu. If you guys don't know LimeCat, he's a good friend of mine. But you'll notice we do provide some of the controls that aren't available really today in HTML. So we've got menu, we've got the progress bar here, which you can see you can activate, and there's a few others that I've left out. But the point is you can leverage the same control set that you see in other Windows applications, but it's not just about keeping the same Windows look and feel. You can also take those controls and apply your own branding to them. Because sometimes the Windows look and feel isn't necessarily right for your application. You want to stand out a bit or match your colors for the rest of your application. So in this case, this is still a button. And what I've given it is just some other like rollover type behaviors. But fundamentally, within the application and for accessibility purposes, it is still a button. And for programmability, it is also still a button. So it still has that click event, and it still has all those other properties that are available on button. We can take that customization a bit further and get a little silly with our friend Buttonfish here. And again, this is, we see we've got some cool little hover effects, and even on click, he can do a little dance, I guess. And, but again, just like the branded button, this is still a button. And it's just been very customized by a designer in this case. And we can take that a little further, I guess. And you saw before, like our list boxes, other things like that can really contain rich content. Well, in this case, what I've created is a button that resides within a button. So I don't know, it was a fish theme, don't ask me. Let's move on to layout. So WPF provides a variety of what we call panels. Now this will allow you different ways to lay out a set of elements. So in this case, what you're seeing is stack panel, and it has two modes, horizontal and vertical. In this horizontal mode, it basically just stacks things horizontally. And in vertical mode, it just goes through and stacks things vertically. Fairly easy to understand. And in both cases, what they do is in the direction perpendicular to the stacking. So if you're stacking vertically, what it does is it takes all the children and makes them the same width horizontally. So if I go through here and I make this stack panel less wide, you'll see all the children are synchronized in their width. Fairly straightforward, and we'll see it in practice. A more traditional layout is what we call wrap panel. This essentially just takes the elements in there and wraps them. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm decreasing the width of this wrap panel, and as the width is smaller, we break the lines of the elements. And again, this can also have a vertical mode where we essentially do the same here. Another layout that doesn't tend to have actually has a good precedent in WinForms is what we call dock panel. And what this essentially allows you to do is take the actual child elements and dock it to a particular side of the screen. So in this case, this first child here has been docked to the left side of the screen, this next one to the top, and so forth. And again, we still get like resized behavior here that makes sense. And finally, our richest layout is what we call grid. Now, this is essentially what we've targeted this panel at is essentially the top level layout scenarios. So you might have, like, if you think back to desktop publishing applications such as Quark Express or Adobe InDesign, what you typically do is you set up grid lines and then you would lay out things with respect to those grid lines. And grid can do basically the same. You see we can have elements that span across rows. We can also have elements that overlap, unlike traditional HTML tables. And once again, of course, this resizes with some regard to aspect ratios and so forth. Finally, we also have, just real quick, we have really integrated and built-in vector support. Now, vector graphics, as I'm sure you all know, are able to scale, albeit scarily, but scale without loss of quality, and let's bring that back there. But we can also do a host of other operations to it without losing quality. So in this case, rotation, skewing, giving my face all sorts of abuse, I guess. And but what's great is you can take the actual elements in the drawing and manipulate them programmatically. So in this case, what I've done is I've removed the black lines out of the image, and I'm just left with the color tones, and I can even give myself some new hairstyles, I guess. So let's actually see some of this in practice. So what we have here is a little utility called XAMLpad, and it comes in the SDK that we have, and it's included in the CDs you got today. But essentially what it gives us is a two-pane view here. On the bottom, what I have is my actual XAML source code, and on the top, I have the representation of it. So in this case, we just have a simple page with a background of light blue. Let's change that to, say, light green, or we can even use the traditional hex notation, I guess. I should be really official there. So we've got a light yellow, but I don't really like that. Let's just go back to the light green. And let's start off by inserting an image into this. So you'll notice a couple things. One is, again, as I typed, this updated when I was finished typing. And second, this should look very familiar for those of you familiar with XML and familiar with markup languages in general. We have the source property, which takes a value within quotes. And finally, this is XML, so we do have a tag that closes itself. Alternatively, you could have the image tag closed by an actual close tag. So this looks okay, but let's go ahead and give it a cool little border around it. So I'll do that by wrapping a border element around the image. And by default, that doesn't really do anything because I haven't set any properties on it. So let's go ahead and set the thickness of the border equal to something like 10. And we'll set the brush that the border uses to draw in there to white. So now we've got a white border that's drawn, but you'll notice it's not really tight around the image here. We still got green space showing through, and it's not snug against the edge. So what I'll do is I'll set the horizontal alignment property to center. Now this tells the border to center itself within its parent horizontally, and we'll do the same vertically for now because we'll use it later. Okay, so this looks all right. Let's add, I guess this is kind of a Web 2.0 thing, so let's go ahead and add rounded borders. We can do that by adding this corner radius property. And you notice here, let me go ahead and zoom this in a bit. We've got those nice rounded borders, and let's keep on going though. I'd rather have this at a square aspect ratio, so I'm going to go ahead and hard code the height and width to 100. Actually, let's make that 150. But once again, we're not quite filling the space here. So what's happening is even though I have a height and width set of 150, by default we're keeping the aspect ratio of the image. So I could change that quickly by telling it to stretch and fill the entire area. But then what I've done is I've broken the aspect ratio of the image. So we have another property that another value for this property called uniform to fill. And what this does is it actually ends up cropping part of the image, but goes ahead and fills up all the rest of the space while still respecting the aspect ratio. So that's starting to look kind of cool. Let's add something else, though. And I'm going to use something that we call property element syntax. And I'll explain that in a second. But first, what I'll do, I'm going to set a layout transform. Let's make the close tag. And then I'm going to set the layout transform to be a rotate transform. And we'll give it an angle of, I don't know, 10. So what I've done is I've taken the border and rotated its entire contents by 10 degrees. I think actually probably -5 might look a little cooler. And this property, we call this property element syntax. And this is really useful for times where essentially layout transform is a property on border. But we want to set that property, it's not something simple like a string. We really want to be able to set an object, which is in this case represented by an XML tag. So essentially what you have is the element's name dot its property. And you could set other properties like this. I could set border brush the same way. It's just a matter of whichever is convenient for you. So we've got one image, and that's all right. Let's see how it would do multiple images. So we'll start with our friend, the stack panel. I'm just going to wrap this around the border. And that's only one picture, so that's not that interesting. I'm just going to go ahead and copy-paste this guy a few times. So now we've got multiple images, but they're just stacked one on top of each other because that's what stack panel does by default. I can go through and I can change the orientation of the stack panel here by setting the orientation property to horizontal. And I've got the same thing, but going off to the side. Really what I'd rather do is have the pictures wrap. So I'm going to change this to a wrap panel. And again, you can see if I resize this, it goes ahead and wraps its contents. But I think it probably looks a little better vertically. So we'll keep the orientation as vertical. So again, very easy to basically choose a basic layout and be able to do something quickly and easily with it. And you notice that this rotation, that we're not bumping into the other elements. That's because this is what we use what's called a layout transform. And what that does is that goes ahead and rotates the actual element while still inflating its layout size such that it all fits correctly. So that's a very quick introduction to XAML. I actually skipped a couple slides. I'm going to do this just because you guys will get videos of this, and it's all tracked based on the PowerPoint. So every time I forget to do PowerPoint, it makes it tougher to browse this talk. So what we just did is this little Fisher-Price My First XAML thing. Now let's take a first look at some of the more sophisticated tools, Visual Studio and Expression. So Visual Studio, I believe, is included in the CDs you guys got. It's a development environment that can be used for a wide range of things, both ASP.NET development all the way to normal Win32 development. And what we're releasing with Visual Studio and with WPF is a bit of integration there. So you can see some of this by what we're going to do is we're going to start a new project. And you'll see we have a WinFX category here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new XAML browser application. We'll call it Asia. Why I'm calling it Asia will be apparent soon, I promise. So now we've got a little application, and there's a bunch of files that are all generated. It's not a big deal. Let's go through and do our little hello world. But I'm going to do a hello world that's a bit more functional. So let's go ahead and set the font size here, and we'll just write Thailand and Cambodia. Because what I'm going to do is we're going to build out a little application that shows off some of my pictures from Thailand and Cambodia. Let's go ahead and build, and what this will do is this will compile the application and then launch it within a web browser so we can see it. And here we go. You've got IE7 coming up, and there's our text. So cool, not looking too bad. Let's do something a little better. What I'm going to do is, so let's build out a little application that lets me both view some photos from Thailand and also read some of my thoughts about it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this image that we made in XAMLpad. I'm just going to copy the XAML straight. And we'll put it within this. Whoa, copied a bit too much, didn't I? And we'll add it as a child of this list box. And you notice here, when I was mocking this up in XAMLpad, I was using an absolute path. We can't really do that when you're running in the web, obviously. So let me go ahead and make that a relative path. And let's start a folder for images within the project. And what I'll do is I'll add the images that I'm going to use today into the actual application. And when we deploy that application, all these images will be included with it. So now we've got our fun little images. And let's go ahead and build again. So cool, now we have an image. It's in our list box, but our text disappeared. So the reason for that is we didn't set up any rows and columns for grid. So by default, grid just has a single row and a single column, and we just end up overlaying everything and didn't give anything space. So I'll do that by defining the rows and columns for this. So what I've done is I've used, again, property element syntax, and I'm setting a property called row definitions. So what row definitions allows us to do is specify all the rows, and column definitions specifies the columns within a grid. So in this case, I'm telling the grid that you should have 2 rows, and the first row, the height of that should be determined by sizing the content. So essentially what it'll do is it'll look at the children that are within the first row, and then base the height upon the size that those children need. So I want the Thailand and Cambodia to be in the first row, and this is 0 based, so I set grid.row equals 0. And I want the list box to be in the second. And let's go ahead and start this up. And then we see we've now got Thailand and Cambodia up here, and then list box towards the bottom. So eventually what we're going to do is we'll have a list box, and I can select various images to look at. For that, we'll probably need 2 columns. So we'll set up column definitions. And again, the left column will be the list box, so I want to give it only as much space as it needs. And the right column will just take up the rest of the space. And let's go ahead and, so I want to set that this should be in column 1, which is really column 2. And the top child should span 2 columns. And let's add a little placeholder child here. So font size. And we'll be really creative and just name them placeholder. And finally, I'm going to go ahead and set a minimum width that I want for this application, as well as a minimum height. So we'll build and run. And now you see that I messed up. So what happened? I believe I set the list box in the wrong column. Yes, list box should be in the first column. And this guy needs to be in the second row and the second column. OK, so we're starting to get something that resembles a layout. And I'm going to take this chance now to to do a little demonstration and actually use expression to go ahead and make my application both a little prettier and fix the layout up a bit. So let's open up our project file. So you see here, this is the project file that Visual Studio generated. And we can open it up directly within Expression. So you see here we have the same layout that we were just working on. And let's start. Let's look at our little timeline here. Who does not want to resize? You can see here's the grid, here's the text block, and the elements that we built out. Let's take the grid and actually set a background on it. And we'll do a cool little gradient by manipulating it here. Let's change the dark color to, I don't know, greenish. Ugh. This is why it's the developer talk, not the designer one. Whatever. You guys will live. Yeah, I know. So let's make the list box background transparent here so we can see the color. And I've actually prepared beforehand a little, I drew a little map here, and I want to use it. So where's my text box? Oh, wrong tool. And so let's make him only about that wide, and let's open up. So one of my images is actually a vector drawing here. And what you've got is a crude representation of Thailand and Cambodia. And if we go into the XAML code view here, you can see that this is just XAML. Now, granted, it looks a bit complex, and that's because it's just essentially vectors. So you've got a bunch of points, you've got some Bezier curve set on it, and a bunch of fills. But in the end, it's usable as a XAML file. This was spit out from a converter from a graphics program. So I can just go ahead and copy this, and let's paste it straight into, oops. We'll paste it straight into our application. That's a bit big, so let's resize it. And it's looking okay, but now we're over the image. So let's size this guy a little further down. I like it kind of rotated. So that's looking okay, I guess. Yeah, don't expect too much out of me, sorry. So let's go ahead and save out the project, and we'll just go close Expression. You'll notice that Visual Studio comes back warning us that the file has been modified. We'll go ahead and just reload the file. And let's build it and run. And there we've got our application with the changes from Expression. So the point here is necessarily that one person would be doing it all. This happens plenty of times. There's plenty of one-man shops. But I could be doing the work with a designer in conjunction with somebody who can actually choose a decent color here for the background. But we could work within the same files and be using, again, because of XAML, because of the technology on the platform, be working together without having to go back and forth with image mockups and so forth. I've left a little ugly border here. I'm going to be a little bit anal about it and fix it. So let's set the border thickness to 0 on the list box. And once again. And now we've got no border. Cool. So let's see. What do we want to do next? OK, so we're going to have obviously more than one image. Let me do one thing first. Our images are this image is a bit big, but actually, let's not worry about that. Beforehand, aside from all those images I created, I created a little XML file that explains, it's just a very simple file. So what you see here is a files tag and then various pic tags. Each of them contain a title, essentially a URL to a XAML page that we want to navigate to, and a URL to the image. So how are we going to use this within our application? So we've already added it as a resource into our application. You see files.xamls here. And now let's add it as a resource for the application. So actually, let's do it here. What I'll do is I'm going to use page.resources. And again, this is just this property resources exist on all of our elements, and you can use it to store things that you provide with a name and then fetch later. And we'll illustrate that. So we have an XML data provider, and the source is from files.xml. X key is what we'll refer to it as, so I'll just call it files data. And then finally, what it has is an XPath property that we can use to bind to the items. And we're going to set this here, and if you remember the XML file here, this is just XPath. It's standard used all over in XML. It's essentially, as a child, look at all the pic elements that are children of the element files. Great, so we now got a source, and there's a way to reference it. And what do we call it? Files data? Cool. And let's go to our list box. I'm going to remove that image child we had. And instead, what I'm going to say is listbox has a bunch of items, and I'm going to tell it where I could find those items. So I'm going to use item source, and I'm going to set it using a binding expression. And I'll explain this in a second, but basically I set binding source equals, and then static resource, and again, this is the resource that we just defined, and that was files data, I believe. And we need to tell it a way to display this, so we'll set display member path to the title property. So again, we've got a title property here. Again, that's just xpath. Xpath, yes. Whoa. And I messed something up. It sounds like I did not close a tag. And nobody caught it. There we go. Cool. So instead of the image now, what I have is the actual file name, the name for the photo of each of these files that we have. Now we can, obviously this doesn't look as good as the photos, so let's go ahead and tell the list box just how they should display each photo. So we'll do this by creating what we call a data template. Now what a data template does is for a given data type, in this case it's pic, which is the name of the element, it lets us choose how we're going to display that element. So I'm going to copy, paste back in the XAML that we created for the images before. You remember this. And instead of having a hard-coded path here, I'm going to use the data binding expression again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind to, in this case, the x path, and the property in this case is called source, because that's the actual path to the image. So if we do this and go ahead and run. Oh, I forgot one thing. So what happened here is, although I did define a data template, this display member path overrode it. So by deleting display member path, now if we build and run again, because there wasn't a display member path set, you now see that we're binding to data, and we've got those 4 images that were supplied in the XML file. Now let's take a break, and actually, I need to do the PowerPoint switcheroo here. Let's learn a bit more about the platform. And now we're going to take specifically a look into the text and reading capabilities. We'll start off first by looking at text. And some of you have heard this before, but we are providing built into the platform, it comes for free, support for subpixel clear type. Now this essentially allows your fonts to look very smooth and beautiful and increases readability a lot. So for example, just like vectors, we can take this and scale them to very high sizes without a loss of quality. And additionally, something that's been kind of a plague toward especially branding and standing out on the web today is the lack of ability to use your own font. So we're helping this in a couple ways. One is Windows Vista provides these 6 fonts that all start with C, you see up at the top, installed by default on all new Vista machines now. Additionally, in WPF, we provide the ability for you to embed your font as a resource and then distribute it with your application without actually having to have it installed on the user's machine. So what I'm showing here on the bottom are some custom fonts that actually come for free with good licensing terms with the WPF SDK. Additionally, we have rich support for a feature in fonts called OpenType. So what you're seeing here is a demonstration of a feature called contextual alternates. Now, this is a feature in OpenType that exists in a bunch of nice fonts that designers tend to have today, but isn't really exposed because the APIs aren't there and easy to use. So in this case, what you saw in that animation was the designer has provided a different capital letter for when it begins the word. So in this case, the T has like a nice little swash, and there's a lot of little things that are provided in these fonts that essentially come for free here. Going up a level, if we look at how you assemble that text into something readable, this is an example of a document created using the WPF flow document technology. So the first thing you'll notice is that we're actually displaying this content in multiple columns. Unlike most of the text you see today, we're not actually using a scroll bar. And there's a variety of reasons for that, the biggest of which has to do with ergonomics and what scrolling does for reading. Scrolling tends to slow people down, it confuses people, and it essentially makes it often uncomfortable to read. But also what we're doing is we're actually we can make better use of the actual screen real estate here. So if I zoom this content out, you'll notice that as the font size got smaller, what I did is I'm fitting more columns within the actual screen. And I can take this window and resize it, and you'll see that as I adjust to different screen sizes, the number of columns that I'm displaying adjusts dynamically. And the reason for this is that essentially your users will have both a variety of screen sizes, but also a large disparity in visual acuity. So essentially by letting them choose based on whatever device they're on and whatever context they're at, a more optimal reading experience, you can really richen their experience here. So again, we can actually see at this larger font size, I can page through and read this document very comfortably. Additionally, we provide built-in support for annotations. So what I can do simple things such as just highlight the content here, a few different colors. But I can also add my own annotations. So in this case, I really agree with what he said. Or I can even add annotations that are ink-based. I don't have a tablet, so you'll pardon my complete inability to draw anything sensible. But you'll notice that these annotations do stay with the document as we reflow. So as I resize, we've still got the same area highlighted, and I can still see the annotation that's written there. I can page back and forth between them. So let's go ahead and, while I fix this, let's go ahead and try some of that code itself and just see how it feels. So first thing we'll do is let's add a custom font to give it a better feel. So what I'll do is let's add a new folder. We'll call it Resources, if I can type. And I'm going to add a font called Lindsay, which is actually one of the fonts that does come with the WPF SDK. So now you'll see we have a font file here. And in order to reference this, what I can do is, here's the text block that was the title. I'll set the font family property to the directory in which the font resides, and then the font's name. If we go ahead and run this, give it a second. Obviously, I did something wrong. Let's go ahead and build clean. Cool. So notice that the Thailand title, the Thailand and Cambodia, those words there, are now being drawn in a different font. And this isn't a font that's installed locally on this machine. It comes actually with the program itself. Let's add something a little cooler than that. And originally, we have our little placeholder text block here. Let's replace it with a frame. And we'll tell that frame that its source should point to, I don't know, intro.xaml. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new flow document here. We'll call it intro.xaml. And I'll just use it as the first introduction text that I make in my application. So what we have here is the default template for a flow document. You'll see it's already got some properties set and a sample tag. It's got George as a font family, which I don't really like, so let's go ahead and put my custom font again. And I don't know, welcome to my vacation. Let's add another paragraph. Does anybody want to play with Mad Libs maybe? Give me an adjective. Hello there. My talk. Blah, blah, blah. I don't have much patience, apparently. And so you see here, we're already seeing the bit of text, again, being displayed in our font. And we have already a default control for controlling the zoom. I don't think anybody wants to watch me actually sit here and type all of that out. So I've pre-prepared a few pages for us. So I've just added these pages as resources, and you can take a look at the markup here. And essentially what you see, it should look fairly familiar. You've got paragraphs with a bit of text in here. We have an element called figure that holds within it essentially a bit of UI. In this case, we're going to show an image. And this will make more sense in a second when I go ahead and display these. But in order to do so first, we can't just have this frame pointing directly to intro.xaml. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bind the URL that the frame points to the photo that is currently selected in the list box. Now, what we see in the list box here is I've got this binding set. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy that straight up. And I'm going to set the XPath equal to the href property. And I need to add another property on this guy called is synchronized with current item. So what does this do? What I've done is I've bound the frame, the source of the frame, to the actual same collection that we're using when displaying the photos. But by telling the list box to synchronize the item it's currently displayed with the collection, what it tells is the frame which one of those items it should be displaying at the given time. So what you'll see here is I now have both our new files, and as I change the selection of which image I'm showing, I'm also navigating to the page. And you'll notice again that this is within Internet Explorer, and we are making full use of the back and forward buttons. So each time I did navigate and change that page, it is something that got journaled within IE. So that's not looking bad. And again, I promised I would explain a bit about the markup here. So what you've seen is at the top, what we have here is the title. It's written in a slightly larger font. Let's go ahead and look at the source. So what I've done is I've put it in an element called figure. And I've set the font size to 30. But what I've done is I've actually taken that figure and anchored it to the very top of the page, to the very left of the page, by doing horizontal equals content left. And I've set this element to have the width of the entire content, which is why in this case you see, let's change the zoom here to something larger. You'll see that it basically sits on a line within itself, even when there's a second column here. So this text isn't here. Cool. So let's get back to Mr. PowerPoint. And it's time to introduce a few more things, tricks that we have up our sleeve here. A second. So let's take a look at effects. Oh, you're not seeing anything, are you? There we go. Effects are essentially what we have is a set of bitmap effects that you can apply to any element within Avalon. So in this case, what I can do is I can apply a drop shadow here. And let's manipulate this so we can see it a bit better. So you see here, I can actually control the depth of the drop shadow. I can change the direction in which it points. I can even change the color that we're using. Although it's probably not super visible there. Let's keep it at black. Aside from drop shadow, we also have blur, which lets me do live blur here. And it's not just limited to text. I can take our friend Limecat and go ahead and blur him, or even Mr. Buttonfish. And although it's not strictly an effect, what I'd like to add is this little reflection. And you've probably seen this in some of our demos, but essentially just to show that this is in fact live. So as I change the blur, both the reflection and the actual element itself are both being blurred. And this effect is actually really easy to use. It's something called Visual Brush. And what you can do is you can apply it to any currently visible element. And we'll see him again in a second. Let's take a look at some of our media support. So actually, I need sound for this. Wow, it sounds horrible. Do we know why the feedback's there? Is there something I can do? Okay. Well, if we don't have sound, it'll just be too bad. So what we have here is a video playing, and you can't hear a thing of it. So, which is all right. They're speaking in Spanish. They're saying really funny stuff, too. So, but the idea was that they are indeed speaking in Spanish. And what I've done is I've added little subtitles that each character has their own little font. And even as an homage kind of to pop-up video, so the notion of little facts popping up as we play the video. And let's see, in a second, don't worry too much about it. It's almost done. So I can see here, like, let's go ahead and find out more about this. Is that all right? And you can imagine, like, some of the rich experience. You saw both, I'm overlaying with opacity some controls onto there. Both the subtitles are, wow. And,
Marcela? Ciao, tío Fernando.
Anyway,
Adiós, señor
that's all right. I just mute it. Don't worry about it. Thanks, though. So what you can see is we can do a lot of rich things with, again, very large video in a rich, immersive way, integrating that with some of the rich text support that you've seen, and with the ability to provide some kind of real next-generation experiences here. Let's go ahead and pause that video. Finally, let's take a look at some of the 3D support. This is something that you don't see supported super well in a lot of the platforms today. And we do provide some support here. What you see is a little simple model of a CD. You can click on it and the CD pops out. And what I've done is I've set up a few list boxes here where I can kind of preview, in essence, an album. So whatever list box here I've chosen, I can go ahead and see like what the front and back would be. My favorite rapper, Lemon C, you can see his new CD, and even Frogger here. And it's fun. But the thing is, with WPF, essentially, these are both its images. It's a custom font being, I guess I can't really mouse over that and point. It's a custom font being layered on top with a bit of opacity onto these images. And again, you can use any WPF element to paint a 3D surface. So in this case, we can even take our Friends in the Spanish video. And what we have here is you can imagine a rich DVD cover, which even shows you a preview of what the movie is. And again, it still works. It's still the same 3D image. Whoa. So let's go ahead and add a little media support into our application. There we go. And what did I do? Okay. So I've prepared a video from my vacation. Let's go ahead and add it. So I've both got a video and a little JPEG preview of it. Since I have this little swimming JPEG, let me go ahead and create a new element in our XML so we can see a link to it. We'll call it swimming. And it'll link to swimming.xaml. And I didn't put in the images directory, so let's link to swimming.jpg. Go ahead and build and start. And we'll see here that we have something wrong. We have a crash. So what happened? Swimming.xaml doesn't exist. Makes sense, because all I did was I added the images. So let's go ahead and add a page. Do that here in project, and we'll add a new item. Add a new page, and we'll call it swimming.xaml. And let's go ahead and run again. And once again, we can see our little photo, but no content, because all I did was I created a blank page. Let's start off, and we'll add a little video, but let's first start by setting up our grid. So I want just 2 rows here. And the first row will take up all the space, while the second row just has an auto height. The first, let's just set the, let's just show a preview of the video. And we'll only play the video when the user actually specifies and hits a play button. So let's create a set of play buttons. We'll use a stack panel. We'll align it to the center, and we'll orient it horizontally. And within there, let's go ahead and put just 3 buttons. One called play, one called pause, and one called awesome. Go ahead and build. Can navigate to the page, but oops, I forgot to set the actual rows and columns. So let's set grid row equals 1 to put in the second row. And let's also, because this is taken with just a movie off a camera, it's not very high resolution. What I'm going to tell the image to do is stretch no larger than its native resolution. So we do this by setting the stretch direction to down only. So what this will do is if there is not enough room to fit the image at full native size, it'll stretch it downward, but it won't stretch upward if there's extra room for it. Let's look at this again. Now we've got our image. We've got some very primitive, awesome buttons. And let's go ahead and set up a video. We'll do this by using the media element. And we'll set the property to, what's the name of the video? Swimming.wmv. And we'll also set the stretch direction here to down only. But what I'll do is I'm going to set the behavior, the loaded behavior here to manual, which means I want to manually control whether or not the video starts and stops. Otherwise, it would just start automatically. But we're going to write some code to set up the handlers here, so I need a way to reference this element. So we'll set its name, and we'll just call the name video. We'll call this name video preview. And we'll also, I don't want to have the video visible at the same time, so we'll start it initially visibility collapse, which hides the element entirely. Cool. So we need a click handler here, so I'm going to set it to call. So whenever the button gets clicked, what I've set up is an event handler for play video, to call the function called play video. Let's open up our code file here. So we've got a corresponding code file called swimming.xaml.cs. And we'll define a new function. So void, what did I call it? Play video? Play video. Play video. So it's a standard event handler, so it takes a sender, and then in this case, routed event args. And just to make sure that this is running, let's go ahead and set a breakpoint in here. So now when I go to the video, I hit play, we actually see I'm in here and debugging. So this is very powerful. You still get the full benefits, even though you're developing and deploying it as a website, you still get the full benefits of debugging on a rich platform. So int I equals 0 isn't that interesting. What I really want to do is let's take the video preview, and when I set its visibility to collapsed, so I'm collapsing the preview, and I want to make the actual video itself visible, so I set its visibility to visibility.visible. And then finally, I'm just going to tell the video to play. So now we hit play, and we see that I did something wrong again. More practice needed, right? So actually, I know what I did wrong. Unfortunately, we have a bug in the current version, and you can't include the video directly as a resource, which isn't a huge deal. What we'll do is instead we'll just tell it to copy the video to the output directory. So if you imagine this was actually playing live on the web, what it would do is it would go back to the server and download this video from there, as opposed to sending out the whole 5 megabyte video down with the application itself. So now that I've actually included the application in the output directory, we can go back to the video and watch it play. Looks fun, doesn't it? So I'm about 50 minutes through, and I'm going to wrap it up. So real quick, this wasn't meant to go super deep in the talk. I just want to give everybody a flavor of what it takes to build an application, and really just see some of the power that you really get in the platform. There's a wide range of possibilities. I didn't even show you everything that you can do with the platform. But really, it builds upon familiar concepts, and we believe it's accessible. The concepts are fairly familiar, and you can use them and build upon them. So as you learn video, as you learn vector graphics, you can build upon that knowledge when you're building your UIs or other presentations. And finally, a big thing here, we do release CTPs, which are essentially you can think of like kind of mini betas about once every other month. We're releasing our second beta soon. And essentially you can download this, try it out, and really get your feedback. We'd really love to hear any suggestions and any thoughts you have on the platform. There's still a bunch of talks. This is only the first day. There's a bunch of related talks you can see. Tomorrow morning, Robert Ingebrigtsen is giving essentially a designer-focused overview. So whereas this was more looking at the developer's role and the types of things you can do with code, what he'll be going over is the breadth of features really aimed at the designer. Also on Tuesday, if any of you were at the previous talk by Michael Wallant, or I believe they showed a clip of it in the keynote, to the North Face application, the guys who built it will actually be going over what their experience was like building that application and explain how it went. And then finally, for those that are interested in WPFE, Joe Stegman will be giving his talk tomorrow afternoon at 3. There are also labs available at the sandbox if you want to play with the bits while you're here at MIX in a guided fashion. So the download again is available from MSDN, and you have it in your CDs. So I'm not going to bother sending a link here. There's a lot of there's a built-in community here. There's a lot of bloggers on my team, including myself. One of my colleagues, Tim Sneath, has been keeping a list. I don't know what the count's at, and you can check out my blog as well. But I'll open it for questions, and again, feel free to email me. But we've got probably about 40 minutes now for questions, and if you guys want to leave early, go ahead. It's the end of the day. You're probably tired. But with that, I'll open it up. Thank you. Go ahead. Is the microphone on?
The question is delivery. In order to get XAML in a browser for download, I'm assuming Vista it's easy. But for down level XP, does that mean they've downloaded whatever the XAML download will eventually become? Do they also have to have installed IE7? What is that all? What are all the bits we need to get onto the client?
Okay. So the question was about deployment and what the requirements are for the host computer. And the answer there is the only requirement is really the actual bits for the WinFX, which includes WPF. That includes the Common Language Runtime 2.0, and it's a package that you can download. Again, like you said, that will be included by default with Vista already installed. IE7 is not a requirement, though. Go ahead.
If I'm hosting a browser application inside an ASP.NET application, how can I communicate between the two?
So the question was about communicating between a XAML browser application and essentially the outside ASP.NET application or perhaps the web page. I don't have a super good answer for that. The ASP.NET guys may have something planned around there, but I don't know of any plans right now around that. I know they are working with the WPFE in order to get script support. You can host a WPF XAML browser application within a frame within an HTML page, though. Go ahead.
Can you speak to the communication that was going on between the XAML app and the compiled code that was on the server, and what was actually on the browser? And
Okay.
like, how does it communicate?
So in the demo that you saw, actually, it was entirely client. So what happened is, oh, sorry, let me repeat the question. The question was about what kind of communication was happening there, what happened to the XAML markup, how much was client, how much was server. And in this case, it was actually all client. So WPF is a client display and presentation technology. And what happens is we compile that, all the markup, all the code into one executable, which can then either be run in the browser or installed.
I noticed that when you were adding styles to the pages, that a lot of it was built in line. Is there any plan for any kind of sort of more of a style sheet model?
So the question was about style sheets and if we have any similar support. And we do. It was one of those things with only 50 minutes. I didn't really have time to show it. But essentially, you can define styles in the resources. And you can define styles that will apply, say, by type of an element or reference them directly by name. So you can do a lot of the same concepts that you've learned there.
Great.
I just didn't have time to show it. Looks like that's it. Feel free to find me. You'll see me dressed in terrible clothes. And I'm not going to a bachelor party. But yeah, thank you.